At 3:47 a.m. on a humid Tuesday morning in Manila, hotel security found something that would shatter two families across two continents. Room 1247 at the Grand Malate Hotel held a scene so devastating that even seasoned investigators would struggle to piece together the events of that fatal night. Have you ever wondered what drives someone to cross an ocean for love? What compels a person to risk everything, their marriage, their children, their entire life, for a relationship built on stolen moments and whispered promises? Do you know someone who's lived a double life? Someone who seemed to have it all together on the surface, but was hiding secrets that could destroy everything they'd worked for? Tonight's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth: the people we think we know best might be complete strangers. Marcus Wellington appeared to be the perfect family man, successful businessman, devoted husband, loving father. But beneath this carefully constructed facade lay a web of deception so complex that when it finally collapsed, it would claim a life and destroy two families forever. Here's the problem: when we build our lives on lies, those lies eventually demand payment. And sometimes, that payment is measured in blood. What started as a chance encounter at a Manila trade conference became a 2-year affair that spanned continents. What began as secret phone calls and hidden bank accounts escalated into promises of a new life together. But when Marcus's wife Rebecca discovered the truth about his double life, she made a decision that would change everything. The question that haunts everyone who hears this story is simple: at what point does betrayal justify the unthinkable? Before we dive deeper into this tragic tale, I want you to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Stories like this one remind us why we need to stay connected to the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it makes us feel. Your support helps me bring you these important stories every week. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you think you know about love, loyalty, and the lengths people will go to protect their secrets. This isn't just another crime story, it's a cautionary tale about the devastating consequences of living a lie. The events that unfolded in that Manila hotel room didn't happen in a vacuum. They were the inevitable result of choices made over months and years, small deceptions that grew into life-altering betrayals. By the end of this story, you'll understand how a successful British businessman's quest for happiness led to a shocking act of violence that no one saw coming. Marcus Wellington lived the kind of life that others envied from the outside. At 45, he had built Wellington Import Solutions into one of Birmingham's most successful trading companies, specializing in electronics and textiles from Southeast Asia. His Tudor-style home in Edgbaston showcased the fruits of his labor: luxury cars in the driveway, manicured gardens, and all the trappings of upper-middle-class success. Married to Rebecca for 18 years, Marcus appeared to be the model husband and father. Rebecca, a former nurse turned stay-at-home mother, had dedicated her life to raising their two children, 16-year-old Thomas and 14-year-old Lucy. To their neighbors, the Wellingtons represented stability and success. Marcus coached Thomas's rugby team on weekends, attended Lucy's piano recitals, and never missed a family barbecue. But success came with a price that Marcus hadn't anticipated when he first started his business. The demands of international trade meant frequent trips to Asia, sometimes 3 or 4 times a year, each lasting 2 to 3 weeks. What had initially felt like exciting adventures gradually became routine, and routine bred restlessness. Marcus was a man who thrived on excitement and novelty. In his younger days, he'd been the life of every party, the friend who suggested spontaneous weekend trips and midnight adventures. Marriage and fatherhood had channeled that energy into building his business, but as the years passed, he found himself yearning for something more than quarterly profit reports and school pickup schedules. The first cracks in his contentment appeared around his 40th birthday. Rebecca had organized a surprise party with all their friends and family, but instead of feeling celebrated, Marcus felt trapped. Looking around the room at faces he'd known for decades, he realized his life had become predictable in ways that suffocated him. He loved his family, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was living someone else's dream. His business trips became his escape valve. In Manila, Bangkok, or Jakarta, he could be a different version of himself, the charming, successful Englishman who turned heads in hotel bars and commanded respect in boardrooms. Away from the responsibilities of home, Marcus felt alive in ways he'd almost forgotten were possible. Rebecca noticed the changes, though she couldn't quite name them. Marcus returned from trips more energetic but also more distant. He'd bring expensive gifts for the family, but his mind seemed elsewhere during dinner conversations. When she asked about his travels, his stories felt rehearsed, lacking the spontaneous details that used to make her feel like she was experiencing his adventures alongside him. The technology that made Marcus's business possible also made his deception easier. Multiple phones, encrypted messaging apps, and separate bank accounts became tools for compartmentalizing his life. He justified these secrets by telling himself he was protecting his family from unnecessary complications. His business dealings were complex, he reasoned, and Rebecca didn't need to worry about every financial detail. But Marcus's restlessness went deeper than business stress or midlife crisis. He'd begun to question fundamental assumptions about his life. Had he married too young? Had he chosen security over passion? These questions gnawed at him during long flights and lonely hotel nights, creating a vulnerability he didn't fully understand. His colleagues knew Marcus as a shrewd negotiator who could close deals that others couldn't. His clients respected his attention to detail and his ability to navigate complex international regulations. But none of them saw the man who stared at hotel room ceilings at 2 a.m., wondering if this was all there was to life. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his success in building bridges between different countries and cultures had somehow created a chasm in his own home. The skills that made him excellent at reading foreign markets and adapting to different business customs had also taught him how to present different versions of himself depending on his audience. By the time Marcus met Catalina Santos at a trade conference in Manila, he wasn't just ready for an affair, he was desperate for one. He needed to prove to himself that he was still the adventurous, passionate man he'd once been, not just the reliable provider he'd become. Catalina Santos represented everything Marcus felt was missing from his carefully ordered life. At 28, she possessed the confidence and ambition that comes from building a career in one of Manila's most competitive industries. As a senior marketing executive for a major telecommunications company, she'd earned her success through intelligence, determination, and an ability to navigate the complex world of international business relationships. Unlike many of the women Marcus encountered in his professional circles, Catalina wasn't impressed by his wealth or status. She'd grown up in Quezon City as the eldest of 4 children, watching her parents work multiple jobs to provide opportunities their own generation never had. Her father drove a jeepney during the day and worked security at night, while her mother cleaned offices and took in laundry. Catalina's success wasn't inherited, it was earned through scholarships, part-time jobs, and a relentless drive to create a better life. When Marcus first approached her at the Manila International Trade Expo, Catalina was leading a presentation about digital marketing strategies for international brands. Her poise and expertise caught his attention, but it was her laugh during the networking reception that made him linger near her group longer than necessary. She had a way of making even serious business discussions feel effortless and engaging. Their first conversation lasted 3 hours. What began as professional networking evolved into something deeper as they discovered shared perspectives on ambition, travel, and the challenges of balancing personal desires with family expectations. Catalina spoke passionately about her plans to expand her company's reach into European markets, while Marcus found himself sharing dreams he'd buried under years of routine responsibilities. For Catalina, Marcus represented a different kind of opportunity. Not financial, she was already successful in her own right, but emotional and intellectual. He was worldly in ways that her local dating prospects weren't, and his stories of building a business from nothing resonated with her own entrepreneurial spirit. More importantly, he listened to her ideas with genuine interest and respect, treating her as an equal rather than someone to be impressed or conquered. Their relationship developed gradually over Marcus's subsequent business trips. What started as professional dinners evolved into personal conversations that stretched late into the night. Catalina showed him parts of Manila that tourists never saw: family restaurants in Binondo, art galleries in Makati, quiet spots along Manila Bay where they could talk without interruption. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly seen and understood. Catalina challenged his ideas, laughed at his jokes, and shared her own vulnerabilities in ways that made him feel trusted and valued. With her, he wasn't just a provider or a business contact, he was a partner in conversations that mattered. But Catalina wasn't naive about the complications of their relationship. She knew Marcus was married, and she'd initially assumed their connection would remain professional. When their relationship became romantic, she made it clear that she wouldn't be content as a permanent secret. She'd watched too many friends waste years on unavailable men, and she had no intention of following that path. Marcus promised her things would change. He spoke about feeling trapped in a marriage that had become more about obligation than love, about children who were becoming independent and no longer needed him as much. He painted a picture of a future where he could relocate his business operations to Manila, where they could build something real together. These promises weren't entirely lies. Marcus genuinely believed them when he made them. In Catalina's presence, the idea of completely restructuring his life felt not just possible but necessary. She made him feel like the man he'd always wanted to be, adventurous, passionate, and free from the constraints that had slowly suffocated his spirit. Catalina invested emotionally in these possibilities because Marcus's actions seemed to support his words. He opened a bank account in Manila, began learning basic Tagalog, and even looked at apartments during his visits. He spoke knowledgeably about Philippine business regulations and cultural customs, demonstrating a commitment that went beyond casual interest. But as months turned into a year, and then 2 years, Catalina began to notice the gaps between Marcus's promises and his actions. His visits remained tied to business schedules rather than personal priorities. His conversations about leaving his wife became more vague rather than more specific. Most tellingly, he seemed increasingly anxious about maintaining the secrecy of their relationship. Rebecca Wellington had always prided herself on being a trusting wife. In 18 years of marriage, she'd never gone through Marcus's pockets, checked his phone, or questioned his business expenses. She believed that marriage required faith, and she'd given Marcus hers completely. But by early 2023, that faith was being tested by a growing collection of small inconsistencies that she could no longer ignore. It started with the phone calls. Marcus had always taken business calls at home, often speaking loudly about shipping schedules and contract negotiations. But recently, his phone conversations had become whispered affairs that ended abruptly when she entered the room. When she asked about these calls, Marcus would dismiss them as boring supplier issues or time zone complications, but his explanations felt rehearsed and hollow. The financial irregularities were harder to dismiss. Rebecca handled the family's day-to-day expenses, but Marcus managed their business accounts and investments. When she needed to access their joint savings for Lucy's school trip, she discovered that their account balance was significantly lower than she'd expected. Marcus explained that he'd moved money into a higher-yield investment account, but when she asked for details, he became defensive and accused her of not trusting his financial judgment. Then there were the gifts. Marcus had always brought souvenirs from his business trips, small tokens for the children and thoughtful presents for Rebecca. But his recent gifts felt different, more expensive and more personal, as if he was trying to compensate for something. A designer handbag from Manila, pearl earrings from Bangkok, a silk scarf from Jakarta, beautiful items that somehow made Rebecca feel more distant from her husband rather than closer. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Marcus was upstairs showering after returning from a week in the Philippines, and his phone buzzed repeatedly on the kitchen counter. Rebecca glanced at it reflexively and saw message notifications from someone named Kat with heart emojis. The messages were in a mix of English and what looked like Tagalog, but the tone was unmistakably intimate. Rebecca's hands shook as she picked up the phone. She'd never violated Marcus's privacy before, but the evidence was literally flashing before her eyes. The phone was locked, but she knew Marcus's passcode, their wedding anniversary, a detail that now felt like a cruel irony. What she found in those messages destroyed her world in minutes. 2 years of conversations between Marcus and Catalina Santos revealed not just an affair, but an entire alternate life. There were photos of them together at restaurants, beaches, and what was clearly a hotel room. There were discussions about apartments in Manila, plans for Marcus to relocate his business, and promises about a future together. But the message that shattered Rebecca completely was from just 3 days earlier. "I can't keep waiting forever, Marcus. We need to talk about the baby." Rebecca sat in her kitchen, surrounded by the familiar objects of her life, family photos, children's school schedules, grocery lists, while reading about her husband's plans to abandon everything they'd built together. The betrayal was comprehensive, involving not just his heart but their finances, their future, and now, apparently, another woman's pregnancy. When Marcus came downstairs, hair still damp from his shower, he found Rebecca sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in front of her. The color drained from his face as he realized what had happened. "How long?" Rebecca asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Marcus sat down across from her, and for the first time in months, he looked directly into his wife's eyes. 2 years, he admitted. The baby? I didn't know about that until this week. Rebecca absorbed this information with an eerie calm that frightened Marcus more than screaming would have. She asked practical questions. How much money had he spent? What promises had he made? How many lies had he told their children? Marcus answered honestly, perhaps because he was relieved that the deception was finally over. He told her about the Manila bank account, the apartment he'd been considering, his plans to gradually shift his business operations to the Philippines. He explained his feelings of suffocation and his need for something more than their predictable life together. I want to see her, Rebecca said finally. What? I want to meet this woman who's been planning my replacement for 2 years. I want to see who you think is worth destroying our family for. Marcus tried to dissuade her, but Rebecca's mind was made up. She booked a flight to Manila for the following week, telling the children she needed to handle some urgent business matters related to Marcus's company. She would confront the situation on her own terms, in the place where her husband had chosen to build his secret life. Rebecca's flight to Manila felt like the longest 14 hours of her life. She told Marcus she was coming, but she hadn't told him when. She wanted the element of surprise, the chance to see Catalina Santos in her natural environment before anyone could prepare scripts or explanations. Rebecca had spent 2 decades being the understanding wife, the supportive partner who never questioned or confronted. That version of herself had died in her kitchen 3 days earlier. She checked into the same hotel where Marcus usually stayed, the Grand Malade Hotel, and used his corporate account to do it. If he was going to destroy their marriage with his credit card, she reasoned, she might as well use it to confront his mistress. The irony felt appropriate. Finding Catalina wasn't difficult. Rebecca had memorized every detail from the photos on Marcus's phone, and a quick call to Catalina's company, claiming to be a potential client, provided her office address. Rebecca spent a day observing from a distance, watching this woman who had unknowingly become the center of her universe. Catalina was beautiful, but not in the way Rebecca had expected. She wasn't the stereotypical younger woman seeking a wealthy foreign husband. She carried herself with confidence and professionalism, laughing easily with colleagues and commanding respect in meetings. Rebecca could see why Marcus had been attracted to her, and that realization made everything worse. On her second evening in Manila, Rebecca followed Catalina to a restaurant in Makati. She waited until Catalina was alone at her table, apparently stood up by whoever she'd been meeting, before approaching. Catalina Santos? Rebecca's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. Catalina looked up, and Rebecca saw recognition flash across her face. Even without introductions, they both knew exactly who the other was. You're Rebecca, Catalina said quietly. I am. Rebecca sat down without being invited. We need to talk. What followed was the most surreal conversation of Rebecca's life. 2 women, separated by age, culture, and circumstances, discussing the man who had connected and betrayed them both. Catalina was initially defensive, but as they talked, both women realized they were victims of Marcus's inability to make difficult choices. He told you he was leaving me, Rebecca said. It wasn't a question. He said you'd grown apart. That you were more like roommates than husband and wife. And you believed him? Catalina's silence was answer enough. They talked for 3 hours, sharing details that painted a complete picture of Marcus's deception. Rebecca learned about promises of relocation and new beginnings. Catalina learned about family vacations and anniversary celebrations that had happened during the same periods Marcus was declaring his marriage dead. But it was when Catalina mentioned her pregnancy that the conversation took a darker turn. He doesn't know yet, Catalina admitted. I just found out last week. I was going to tell him during his next visit. Rebecca felt something cold settle in her chest. When is his next visit? Tomorrow. He's supposed to arrive tomorrow evening. Rebecca made a decision that would haunt her forever. Don't tell him yet. Let me talk to him first. Let me be there when you tell him. Catalina agreed, perhaps sensing that this confrontation needed to happen with all parties present. They arranged to meet at Catalina's apartment the following evening after Marcus arrived and settled into his hotel. The next day passed in a haze of preparation and dread. Rebecca spent hours walking through Manila, trying to process the reality of her situation. Her husband had built an entire alternate life in this city. He'd made promises to another woman that he'd never made to her. And now that woman was carrying his child. When Marcus arrived at Catalina's apartment that evening, he found both women waiting for him. The shock on his face would have been comical under different circumstances. "What is this?" he demanded, looking between them. "This is honesty," Rebecca replied. "Something you've forgotten how to practice." What followed was the most brutal conversation of Marcus's life. Catalina told him about the pregnancy while Rebecca watched his face cycle through shock, fear, and calculation. Rebecca confronted him with the full extent of his lies while Catalina realized how thoroughly she'd been deceived about the state of his marriage. "You have to choose," Rebecca said finally. "Right now. Tonight. Choose." Marcus looked between the two women who represented the two halves of his divided life. Catalina, young and pregnant with possibilities. Rebecca, familiar and complicated with history. The choice he'd been avoiding for 2 years was finally unavoidable. "I can't," he whispered. "You can't what?" Rebecca's voice was dangerous. "I can't choose. I love you both. I need you both." That's when Rebecca snapped. 18 years of marriage, 2 children, a lifetime of trust and sacrifice, and Marcus couldn't choose her over a 2-year affair. The rage that had been building for days finally exploded. The argument escalated quickly. Voices raised, accusations flew, and old wounds were torn open. In the chaos of shouting and crying, Rebecca grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from Catalina's coffee table. What happened next would be debated in court for months, but the outcome was undeniable. Marcus Wellington, successful businessman and father of 2, died on the floor of his mistress's Manila apartment, killed by the wife he'd betrayed. The Manila Metropolitan Police received the call at 11:47 p.m. 2 women, both hysterical, reporting a death at a Makati apartment complex. When officers arrived at Catalina Santos's 15th floor unit, they found a scene that would become one of the most talked about cases in the department's recent history. Marcus Wellington lay motionless on the living room floor, blood pooling around his head from a massive trauma. Rebecca Wellington sat in a corner, still holding the glass paperweight that had become a murder weapon, her clothes stained with her husband's blood. Catalina Santos was on the balcony, vomiting from shock and early pregnancy symptoms. Detective Inspector Maria Reyes, a 20-year veteran of the Manila Police Force, had seen domestic violence cases before, but never one involving foreign nationals with such complex circumstances. The initial investigation revealed a web of relationships and motivations that would take weeks to fully understand. Rebecca confessed immediately. She made no attempt to claim self-defense or accidental death. "I killed my husband," she told Detective Reyes in her first formal interview. "He was going to abandon our children for her, and I couldn't let that happen." The investigation revealed the full scope of Marcus's double life. Bank records showed he'd transferred over £200,000 to Philippine accounts over 2 years. Phone records documented thousands of messages and calls between Marcus and Catalina. Hotel receipts and travel documents painted a picture of a man who'd been living 2 completely separate lives on different continents. Catalina's pregnancy was confirmed by medical examination, adding another layer of complexity to an already tragic situation. She cooperated fully with investigators, providing details about her relationship with Marcus and the events leading up to his death. Her testimony revealed that she'd been unaware of the true state of Marcus's marriage and had genuinely believed his promises about building a future together. The case attracted international media attention, particularly in the UK, where Marcus had been a respected businessman and community member. Headlines focused on the exotic location and the love triangle aspects, but the reality was far more complex than tabloid coverage suggested. Rebecca's children, Thomas and Lucy, were devastated by the loss of their father and the arrest of their mother. They were placed in the care of Rebecca's sister while legal proceedings unfolded. The family's comfortable life in Birmingham collapsed overnight, the house was sold to pay legal fees, and Marcus's business was dissolved. In the Philippines, Catalina faced her own challenges. Her pregnancy became public knowledge, making her the subject of intense scrutiny and judgment. She lost her job due to the negative publicity and struggled with both grief and guilt over her role in the tragedy. The legal proceedings were complicated by jurisdictional issues and cultural differences. Rebecca was charged with murder under Philippine law, which carried a potential life sentence. Her defense team argued for a reduced charge based on emotional distress and provocation, but Philippine prosecutors maintained that the killing was premeditated. During the trial, details of Marcus's deception became public record. Evidence showed he'd been planning to relocate permanently to the Philippines while telling Rebecca he was considering early retirement. He'd been investigating divorce procedures while simultaneously planning a future with Catalina. The prosecution argued that Rebecca had traveled to Manila with the intention of confronting and potentially harming Catalina, making Marcus's death part of a premeditated plan. The defense countered that Rebecca had come seeking answers and that the killing occurred during an emotional breakdown triggered by learning about Catalina's pregnancy. After a 3-month trial, Rebecca was convicted of manslaughter rather than murder. The court found that while her actions were intentional, they occurred during extreme emotional distress rather than as part of a calculated plan. She was sentenced to 12 years in a Philippine prison. Catalina gave birth to a daughter, Maria Catalina, 6 months after Marcus's death. She moved back to her family home in Quezon City and eventually found work with a smaller marketing firm that was willing to overlook her notoriety. The case became a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception and the devastating consequences of trying to live multiple lives. 3 families were destroyed by one man's inability to make honest choices about what he truly wanted. What do you think about Rebecca's actions? Was her response understandable given the circumstances, or did she cross a line that can never be justified? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tragedy that unfolded in that Manila apartment didn't happen overnight. It was the inevitable result of choices made over months and years, small deceptions that compounded into life-altering betrayals. Marcus Wellington's story serves as a stark reminder that the lies we tell to protect ourselves often end up destroying the very things we're trying to preserve. The most heartbreaking aspect of this case isn't just the loss of life, but the complete avoidability of the tragedy. At multiple points, Marcus could have made different choices. He could have addressed his marital problems honestly with Rebecca. He could have ended his affair with Catalina before it became serious. He could have chosen transparency over deception. Instead, he chose the path that seemed easiest in the moment, maintaining both relationships while avoiding difficult conversations. This decision didn't just hurt him, it devastated everyone who loved him. Rebecca lost her husband and her freedom. Catalina lost the man she thought she was building a future with and became a single mother under tragic circumstances. Thomas and Lucy lost both parents and their stable home life. The case also highlights the dangerous fantasy that we can compartmentalize our lives indefinitely. Marcus believed he could keep his 2 worlds separate, but secrets have a way of demanding recognition. The energy required to maintain elaborate deceptions eventually becomes unsustainable, and when the walls finally collapse, the damage is often catastrophic. Rebecca's actions, while legally and morally wrong, emerged from a very human place of pain and betrayal. She'd invested 18 years in a marriage that she discovered was built on lies. The revelation that Marcus was planning to abandon their family for a new life with another woman, and that this other woman was pregnant, triggered a rage that overwhelmed her judgment. This doesn't excuse her actions, but it helps us understand how ordinary people can be driven to extraordinary violence when their fundamental assumptions about their lives are shattered. The lesson isn't that betrayal justifies murder, but that deception creates conditions where rational thinking becomes nearly impossible. For those of us watching this story from the outside, the takeaway is clear: honesty, however painful, is always preferable to deception. Difficult conversations about marriage, happiness, and life direction are never easy, but they're infinitely better than the alternative we've witnessed here. If this story has made you think about the importance of honesty in relationships, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories that explore the complex motivations behind human behavior. And remember, the choices we make in private eventually become public, so choose wisely. What other cases would you like us to explore? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to click that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads.